I'm calling to order this meeting. This is a meeting, an additional meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, April 27th, 2023. The time is 3:54 in the afternoon. This meeting is being held in room 500 of the Council Chambers of the Johnny Wilson Building, but is also being conducted virtually. So there's at least one member who's participating online. Not only is this meeting being broadcast on Council Channel 13, cable television, but it also, I believe, is live via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform and live on the Council website and on my website, which I don't have the address here, which is okay. And so it is, people are able to watch this. We have one item of business today, and that is consideration of measures, which is consideration of report and recommendations of the Committee of the Whole on the fiscal year 2024 budget, corresponding Budget Support Act subtitles. I want to emphasize this is not the Committee of the Whole report on the entire budget. This is only the Committee of the Whole report on the agencies under the purview of the Committee of the Whole. The larger report will come on May 16th. Beginning of our meetings, we try to figure out if we have a quorum. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson.
Present.
Councilmember Allen.
Here.
Councilmember Bonds.
Here.
Councilmember Fruman.
Here.
Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray, Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George.
Here.
Councilmember McDuffie. Councilmember McDuffie, Councilmember Nadeau.
Here.
Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Parker, Councilmember Pinto.
Present.
Councilmember Robert White.
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. I do not have a lengthy prepared opening statement. I have actually two matters that I want to discuss. And the first is not specifically on the report that was circulated yesterday, but I wanted to say this. Members will recall that last month, I and Councilmember Allen were requested to testify before the House Committee on Oversight regarding what they purported to be this concern regarding the district's commitment to public safety. And in fact, there was some critical questioning of Councilmember Allen and myself with regard to a cut to the MPD budget of about $9 million 3 years ago. I want to emphasize 3 years ago. I could also say $9 million. Part of our response was that a major part of public safety in the District of Columbia is funding of our federal agencies, because it is a federal agency, the U.S. Attorney, who prosecutes crimes, not the district government. And it's a federal agency. I hate to put it that way, characterize it that way, but the courts, they're fully funded by the federal government. They're the courts. And then the Bureau of Prisons, and on top of that, the court supervision, CSOSA. And CSOSA is who supervises all returning citizens. And why do I mention any of this? Because earlier this week, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, released his proposed budget to deal with the debt limit. And it would cut by, we estimate, 22% these federal agencies. What he talked about was 11%, but we're pretty certain it would not include discretionary defense spending. So since they have a target number, it would be roughly 22% cut to CSOSA. That's a $45 million cut. Pretrial Service Agency, which does a lot of the pretrial analysis of offenders, whether they're released or held, almost an $18 million cut. Let me repeat, the cut that we were criticized for was a $9 million cut, which I think was a 1% of the, less than 1% of the MPT budget 3 years ago. And those same Republicans turned right around 3 weeks later and proposed cuts of 22% to CSOSA, pretrial services. The courts would be cut by $50 million. And I just want to put that on the record here, that there is, how do I put this diplomatically? Hypocrisy. hypocrisy that we are soft on crime in the District of Columbia because we will cut the police 3 years ago by less than 1% or $9 million. And then they turn around and proudly propose to cut these agencies by, what did I add up? Over $100 million. So we have a report that was circulated yesterday by Legislative Director Evan Cash at about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. In a moment, I will outline the proposed recommendations, but first I want to make some remarks regarding budgeting for our DCPS schools. I am enormously disappointed in Chancellor Farabee and by extension, the mayor. Chancellor Farabee testifies repeatedly that DCPS is committed to the kids and committed to the concepts of stability, equity, and transparency. And yet he and the mayor submitted a proposed budget that's everything but. The gross budget will be almost $67 million higher next year. But 80 of the 116 schools would have their budgets cut. That is not stability. It's more like illegal because the chancellor, and by extension, the mayor, blatantly stated that he had no intention of following the Schools First and Budgeting Act that the council adopted last fall and is law. But I digress. Not only was school after school with large numbers of at-risk students cut, but the at-risk concentration weight that we adopted last year, this was initiated by the council, adopted last year, it's an at-risk weight that's for schools with 40% or 70% concentration of at-risk kids. That money was subsumed into the existing budgets of schools under the mayor's proposal. What does this mean? That these new at-risk dollars were used to supplant, not supplement, school budgets. I repeat, to supplant, not supplement school budgets. Not only does that too violate the law, but it's the opposite of equity. The mission of DCPS is, and I quote, to ensure that every school guarantees that students reach their full potential, unquote. I did not write that. They did, to ensure that every school guarantees that students reach their full potential. Cutting school budgets and erasing supplemental at-risk dollars hurts schools. It does not help at-risk kids. I am tired of hearing how DCPS schools are individually funded on a per pupil basis, because they are not. Similar schools get dissimilar budgets on a per pupil basis. I'm tired of hearing how DCPS promotes equity when so many schools are cut. According to the budget book, and I have to cite my source here because DCPS states its budget in many different ways. Laura Henley Elementary School in the Washington Highlands neighborhood of Ward 8 has a 94% at-risk student population. Next year, its enrollment is projected to drop by 6 students. Yet its budget is being cut under the mayor's proposal by $300,000, over $300,000. That's several teachers or counselors or aides. How does the chancellor propose to ensure that Henley guarantees that its students will reach their full potential? DCPS should be embarrassed. In the draft committee recommendations that were circulated yesterday, the biggest change that we propose is to restore all of the funding cuts to our schools. This at least promotes stability and does not hurt equity. Our recommendations also convert the at-risk concentration weight dollars to being supplemental and also to increase them. More specifically, and now I will outline the proposed recommendations. The major changes are we pushed about $29 million in local recurring dollars to individual schools. We do this through some cuts to central administration at DCPS and also by directing some ESSER funds that are already for DCPS, directed them to central. We increased the at-risk concentration weight by 0.02 from 0.05 to 0.07. For that will benefit both DCPS and charter schools. Moving away from schools for a moment, we double funding for the Historic Homeowner Grant Program. We add 2 FTEs to the Office of Planning for additional planning studies. There is 1 new archaeologist position in the Historic Preservation Office. which will help with Section 8 NEPA reviews. We add 3 FTEs to the State Board of Education, one for the State Board itself, one for the Ombudsman, and one for the Student Advocate. And we transfer out funds for fare-free bus service and baby bonds. We also, I will note, because I don't think this is corrected, but will be corrected, I'll move the report with leave for staff to make technical conforming changes, that the report will be corrected to remove the proposed transfer of capital funds from the Committee on Facilities and Family Services for Jackson Reed. My understanding is that that's being funded in the DGS budget, so it doesn't transfer in. We accept a transfer in from the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety to implement retirement costs for the presumptive disability law, and I believe that's in FY25 and beyond in the financial plan. We accept a transfer from Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety of capital funds for Hardy Middle School auditorium and locker improvements, and for Garrison Elementary School for athletic field improvements. We accept a transfer from the Committee on Health of $678,000 to partially restore funding for Healthy Schools Act related to healthy meals. And I think we're going to look for additional dollars at the next committee of the whole meeting. We accept $1.2 million from the Committee on Housing for implementation of Bill 25-55, which is not yet law, for a new behavioral health master's program at UDC. We accept a transfer from the Committee on Public Works and Operations for 2 new FTEs related to 2 studies. I think I might have touched on this earlier. I think these are the FTEs at the Office of Planning. A study to partially implement the Street Vendor Advancement Act, and $400,000 for a public space study for Mount Pleasant and Columbia Heights. We accept a transfer from the Committee on Business and Economic Development of $168,000 to support the DC State Athletics Commission for additional programming. I'll get the BSA subtitles. I'm going to kind of go over this a little differently. We take a small cut of $150,000 from the District of Columbia Auditor. This is unspent funds and contractual services. We do some rearranging of funding within the, I shouldn't say funding, of the grants allocations within the Commission on Arts and Humanities to create a new large capital grant program. I want to emphasize that none of the other grant lines are being reduced in terms of actual dollars relative to this year. I touched on some of this already in the Office of Planning, a new archaeologist position in the Historic Preservation Office, a doubling of the of the Historic Homeowner Grant Program funding. I think it's from $25,000 to $50,000, the grants. 2 new community planner FTEs in the Neighborhood Planning Office at the Office of Planning, the study for vending, the study for Columbia Heights, Mount Pleasant. In the Department of Buildings, adding funding for 6 new building inspectors, and we're going to continue to work on this at the next committee of the whole meeting. So there were 22 inspector positions cut, and we are restoring 6 at this point. There's a $1 million shift in the DC Public Charter School Board in their fund balance to fund St. Coletta's. Within DCPS, I mentioned increasing the at-risk concentration weight. We increased the enrollment reserve by $1 million. We created a new mid-year mobility fund of $2 million. That's to help schools. That's resources for schools that see increased enrollment mid-year. And I don't mean literally mid-year, but I mean as the year progresses and they're like struggling because all of a sudden we've got so many more kids in the classroom, we need another teacher. That's what the $2 million fund is for. We fully fund the Schools First in Budgeting Act. We do a swap of funding source for a small piece of the impact money. And I do want to note that I think the report is silent on this, but I'll be adding to the report that after this year, the mayor proposed impact be funded this year outside the UPSFF, that she's got to stop doing that. There also was an under budgeting of at-risk money in both DCPS and the charters, if I remember correctly, and we restore that. There also was $110 million fund sweep from the State Athletics Association that we restored. Regarding the BSA. The committee, what I circulated yesterday would have the committee recommending no changes or technical changes to most, or recommending only technical changes to most of the mayoral subtitles that were referred to the committee. Again, this report today is only on that which was specifically referred to the committee or under the jurisdiction of the committee. The report does not comment on several referred subtitles to reflect council-wide balancing. Those will be revised or dealt with when we get to the May 16th meeting. The recommendations do strike. I hope there's not a lot of opposition to this. Subtitle 4H, which provided a $250,000 grant for educating kids about marijuana. There's a new subtitle we recommend for Arts Commission large capital grants. A new subtitle we recommend to expand the historic homeowner grant program. A new subtitle to implement the UDC fundraising match. A new subtitle to allow OSSI to award a healthy food curriculum grant to a nonprofit. And a new subtitle behind the $1 million I mentioned for St. Coletta's. That's one-time funding for St. Coletta's. We're hoping that the adequacy study will flesh out what will be provided in the future through the UPSFF. With that, I move the report and recommendations of the Committee of the Whole on the fiscal year 2024 budget and corresponding budget support act subtitles with leave for staff to make technical forming and editorial changes. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I want to thank you and your staff for a significant amount of work that went into this budget. And I'll note what I've noted at a couple other markups. While the district is facing a difficult financial time, I've really seen council offices and staff pull together in an incredibly collaborative and collegial way. And even on issues where we disagree, there's been a lot of communication and partnership. And I think the city is well served because of it. I do want to thank you specifically for the investments and policy proposals you've made in this budget. And I want to take a few moments to mention some that stood out to me. I appreciate the thoughtful analysis of the Department of Buildings budget and your recommendations on how the agency can assess and improve performance far beyond what we've come to expect from DCRA. I was surprised and disappointed to find that in her proposed budget, the mayor cut 26 of the FTEs that council funded last year to increase the number of housing and construction inspections. As chair of the Housing Committee, I know how critical these inspections are. We have heard from many tenants and multifamily properties who are at the end of their ropes with substandard living conditions. While we often characterize these as quality of life issues, they go far beyond what that implies. People's homes should be safe havens where tenants can trust that their housing is healthy, that their appliances, water, heat, and AC will work, and where they will be free from rodents. This is the least they should expect. So thank you for finding funds to restore 6 of the housing code inspectors. And I support your efforts to find additional funds to restore the remaining FTEs in the next stage. Further on DOB, I noted your commitment to marking up Bill 25-48, the Proactive Inspection Program Act of 2023, which would create a proactive inspection program for multifamily rental housing properties. And I look forward to engaging with your office in my role as chair of the Housing Committee as that bill moves forward. I was glad to see an additional $1 million for St. Coletta Special Education Public Charter School, which serves students with intensive special education needs. The previous adequacy study for the UPSFF did not include students with intensive special education, and the initial budget did not account for the school's unique needs. The additional funding means a lot to the families with students at St. Coletta's and my office has met with many of them. As someone who loves data, I'm interested to see the Deputy Mayor for Education's office take on an employment data system to collect, analyze, and publicize data on how well the district education agencies and programs are serving residents throughout their lifetimes. I hope this will yield insights into what programs are actually working, serve our students, and meet the workforce demands. I look forward to hearing a progress update on this in the future. Two more minutes, Mr. Chairman.
2 minutes.
Well, I could say one,
And then
that's
go for
great.
two.
Yeah, but I'm just going to be honest, it's going to be two.
Without objection.
Thank you. I'm pleased to see that Cal was able to increase the UPSFF at-risk concentration weight by 0.2%. It is critical that we are concentrating funds towards students who are homeless, experiencing economic instability at home, or are in foster care so that they all have the support they need to succeed in school. On DCPS, the committee included $2 million to create a mid-year mobility fund for schools, which would provide the necessary resources to schools to better support students who enroll after count day and throughout the school year. I'm excited about this. Now, Councilmember Matt Fruman has been harassing me about this for years, so I'm excited to see it. I was also pleased to see that the committee was able to identify an additional $23.9 million in recurring funding to implement the Schools First and Budgeting Act. I know we've all heard from teachers, students, and families about concerns that their school budgets were cut in FY24. I'm looking forward to further understanding the trade-offs that were made to implement Schools First and how we can improve this process moving forward. Thank you for including $300,000 in enhancements for 3 new FTEs for the State Board of Education, the Office of the Ombudsman, and the Office of the Student Advocate. I know the demand for these services has increased over the years, and meeting this growing need is critical. On educator retention, something I've been focusing on a lot, I want to continue to emphasize the importance of educator retention, and the hiring and retention strategies that education agencies use should reflect what teachers are asking for. These asks include mental health supports, flexible scheduling, and fair pay for our teachers. I'm concerned that we might continue to lose quality teachers if we don't invest in what teachers are asking us for. I would like to do more work on this in the fiscal year 24 budget, particularly on flexible scheduling. If I've hit those 2 minutes, Mr. Chairman, then I'm going to conclude and just again say thank you for accepting transfers for pathways to behavioral health and for a number of other important policy and budgeting recommendations done by the committee of the whole. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank you and your staff for the work on this budget recommendation report for the investments and policy proposals that you've put forth. The committee's budget has some strong recommendations, which are necessary to lay the foundation for stronger schools and government operations. I was pleased to see the committee recommending creating a mid-year mobility fund with $2 million in one-time funding to provide student-based resources to DCPS schools necessary to support students who enroll after the count day. It was disappointing that the mayor's budget underfunded the at-risk concentration supplement by $1.5 million. So I was also pleased to see an increase of UPSFF at-risk concentration weight by 0.02 or 9.6 million and more across the 4-year financial plan, which will supplement supports of our schools with over 40% of their students identified as at risk of academic failure, with additional support for schools with over 70% identified accordingly. Some additional victories I want to highlight include thanking you for funding 6 new building inspectors for the Department of Buildings. In the Committee on Public Works and Operations, we voted on a budget to add 5 new FTEs to the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection to make sure they have the resources to monitor compliance and enforce our corporate beneficial owner disclosure laws, alongside DOB's building inspectors. Shining a light on opaque LLCs and shell corporations will strengthen the tools we have to go after slumlords and other bad actors. I want to thank you for accepting a transfer of $550,000 to support 2 planning initiatives in downtown Columbia Heights and Mount Pleasant. The first funds a provision of the Street Vendor Advancement Amendment Act of 2023, which requires a look at how public realm design and community resources in Columbia Heights can support the street vendor economy. The second study is a broader public life study and streetscape design guideline for Columbia Heights and Mount Pleasant Street to support future investments in streetscape improvements on these dense commercial corridors. The Public Works and Operations Committee also transferred 2 FTEs for community planners at the Office of Planning to work to support this work, restoring cuts made by the mayor. I do want to point out a couple of things I'd still like to work on around education. The committee's report urges DCPS to explore strategies to continue to promote teacher retention, but we already know how we can do this. We can fund flexible scheduling on the DCPS side by simply requiring them to use just $5 million of their tens of millions of unspent ESSER funds to do so. Budget 1 FTE at OSSI to support flexible scheduling pilots and research throughout the district and work towards broader pilots. And there's so much potential here. I also want to note that the mayor's proposed budget cut of the pay equity fund for early childhood educators of $5.4 million is very disappointing. This is an important investment. Mr. Chairman, if you would, just 30 more seconds.
Without objection.
Thank you. This council made the decision to make a major investment in early childhood educator pay. To see this cut is very disappointing. I know the committee didn't have the opportunity to restore these cuts, and I hope we can work together in the committee of the whole to do so we can fulfill our promise to early childhood educators and also our commitment to the Birth to 3 pipeline. Also just wanted to weigh in and offer my support for the budget requests of the University of the District of Columbia for fully funding their capital budget for their upcoming project, as well as the $2 million recurring for new customer relations management software. I know there will be more that we can work together on in the committee of the whole, and I look forward to doing so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have a lineup. Councilmember Tran White.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you, Chairman, the Budget Office, and the many council members that have worked to pretty much find crumbs on a plate to move around to prioritize needs of residents in Washington, D.C. The journey of this markup has been unique for me, has been one of the toughest in my years as a council member here in 6 years for the FY2024 budget, and presents many more challenges of basic needs for residents and businesses here in the district. I want to focus my comments today on changing recommendations concerning schools. I believe, and I think we all believe, that education is the foundation of any strong community and city. Chairman, I share your sentiments about the budget for DC schools, and more specifically around the Office of the Budget Planning in our schools. I hope that that we are able to fix this. And I know, Chairman, you and your staff have been working diligently to address the School First in Budget Act, a law that council passed last year to ensure that school budgets are not cut in unpredictable and irrational ways, as will still follow. This year, our neighborhood schools in Ward 8 saw cuts to every high school except Ballou. The total cuts was almost 60% of all schools, despite rising costs and little change in enrollment. For the residents, the trickle down and abandonment of neighborhood schools, long commutes to schools through other wards, and the hope that the safety and financial challenges is exacerbated. I hope that both DCPS and the Department, Deputy Mayor for Education and the Office of Budget and Planning will work together in a more efficient way to solve these issues and also to address the at-risk funding. I'm also supportive of the approximately $3 million allocated to repairs to Hardy Middle School, Garrison, Jackson Reed. I hope the chairman can work together to repair some of our schools east of Anacostia River as well, because we do need it. And there are several schools in the budget with repairs, but most of those repairs are 2, 3, 4 years from now. And I just think that those middle school kids will be graduating from high school by the time they even see these repairs, depending on DGS. I'm also concerned about the well-being of the working class people in the district and our growing population of senior citizens in our city. The safety nets has almost disappeared for some of the most neediest residents in the city in this budget. This budget is by no means a budget that speaks to equity and inclusion. I did a calculation of an apartment that was roughly $1,500, and in 5 years, that same rent will project to be around $1,900 a month. The average earning of the poor and working class in this region does not come close to this growth. This budget markup is not our final straw for residents and stakeholders. We have another opportunity to get it right in our upcoming COW. And Chairman, in my meetings with you and other stakeholders, I know we're committed to excellence in our city, and we have to do better and dig deeper to get it right. Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank my staff that's been up to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out how we can better serve the residents of all DC, not just in Ward 8, to a more equitable and livable government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Take a couple of quick remarks. First, I want to commend you and your staff and all the hard work that goes into this. The mayor's proposed budget this year presented us with some devastating cuts to programs across the board, some of which were individual school budgets. And when the mayor's proposed budget was released, I was concerned, like many of us, that cuts to individual school budgets, despite the fact that many of the schools, especially in Ward 6, saw an increase in enrollment. And I'm very glad to see this report and set of recommendations reverses that and increases individual school budgets. I think this is going to provide more clarity and stability for our school leaders. And you said that was going to be a priority for you, and you've made that happen. I appreciate it. Still related to schools, I want to thank you for also preserving a lot of our school modernization plans. There are a host of schools in Ward 6 that are slated for modernizations in the coming fiscal years. So I'm very glad to see those plans remain on track. Lastly, I want to thank you for working with me on identifying funds for DC's Fare Free Bus program. This is a program that this council has championed. It'll get more people on Metrobus back to work. It's going to be a big part of our economic recovery for DC businesses and residents. And maybe most importantly, it's going to make a near immediate impact for struggling DC residents' bottom line and household budget, where we know transportation costs are high. So I look forward to seeing that finalized in the next couple of weeks. And I know there's still a lot of work to come in the big cow in the next couple of weeks. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to your team. I look forward to supporting the report and recommendations today.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start off by thanking you and your staff for all the work you've done putting this together. 3 minutes is certainly not enough time to discuss all the components of this, but I will do my best, and I also have some questions. There's a lot of good here. Some of my colleagues have already mentioned, together with my committee, the Committee on Health, restoring the funds to the Healthy Schools Fund, the increased payment for St. Coletta's, increase to the UPSFF at-risk concentration weight, the creation of a mid-year mobility fund for DCPS, additional FTEs at the resource-strapped State Board of Education, increased inspectors at the Department of Buildings, and the creation of a large capital grant program for the Commission on Arts and Humanities. I did want to add that I am still concerned about the special education bus situation within OSSI and them not having enough money to deal with the challenges surrounding the numerous routes that they continue to provide transportation for. This lack of funding and personnel, frankly, has resulted in deals with an increasing amount of private bus contracts. And I hope this is something that we can address moving forward. Now for my questions. I'll start with the capital project enhancement for Hardy Middle School auditorium and locker improvements of $675,000. Can you speak to the need for this? I'm not aware that this had come up in hearings. I've heard about Hardy's need for additional teachers and their desire for additional space, but I hadn't heard anything in particular in terms of the auditorium or their lockers.
I believe this was a transfer in from the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. I don't know if Councilmember Pinto wants to speak to it.
Sure. Sorry, Councilmember Henderson, were you asking about the Hardy Auditorium and Lockers?
Yes, I wasn't aware. I don't think that this came up in public discussion, that there was an issue with the auditorium and lockers. I knew that they wanted additional teachers and space, but not this project in particular. And I just had a question about how this made it in.
Sure. So this is actually something that the Hardy school community has been asking for 2 or 3 years, at least since I've been in this position, particularly with some overcrowding spaces that they've had as their enrollment increases in transporting students as they go from class to class. And so some of the spacing concerns have been particularly highlighted with the auditorium that is very old and presents a number of safety concerns. Specifically, they have poor acoustics and poor lighting. And the lockers issue is that the lockers are physically too small for students to put their backpacks in. And so in effect, students are just leaving their items in the hallway, which is also creating a transition issue as they go from class to class. I had hoped that this would just be able to be absorbed by DCPS, but over 1 year, it has not become a reality. And so we thought it necessary to put specifically in the budget to make sure that this project moved forward.
There's no objection. We're going to take additional time.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that, Councilmember Pinto. I would just express in terms of, I think all of you know how I feel about one-off capital projects for schools outside of PACE and small capital, is that I appreciate each of my colleagues, especially the ward members, under the pressure that you have. But when we start doing the one-off projects, there are other projects that don't get done in terms of their full piece. And I wasn't aware of the particulars in terms of life and safety concerns in terms of the auditorium, but I hope we can continue to talk about that. I have 2 other questions, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
It depends on the question.
Okay, I'll go on. Regarding the BSA subtitle to create the education and employment data system. I raised this during the hearing with the Deputy Mayor for Education, and I'm still slightly unclear in terms of how this is different from what has been done with the DC statewide longitudinal education data system, commonly known as SLED, which we have already spent millions of dollars on. While I recognize that the data is different, the data exists at other agencies already. And so I'm not sure why we need to create an entirely new data system for something where the agencies who already have this data can just talk to each other.
This is in the DME budget.
That is correct.
Yeah. I can't say. Hold on. Councilmember, I'm happy to talk to you about it further. We probably should have talked about this after the hearing, and I don't mean any criticism there. I just haven't been very focused on it since the hearing. I thought there was some criticism that came up at the hearing of this, and as I listened to the answers, I was comfortable with the answers. I hope the deputy mayor is not hearing me say that, but I did feel comfortable with the answers. It's a little bit different in that it deals with, as you know, the deputy mayor.
I know it
Several years
includes the
ago,
employment data,
Yeah, he has.
but DOES, as well as the Office of Tax
Yes.
and Revenue, has
and so
that
that
data.
makes it different.
So why can't we just build a module onto the existing multi-million-dollar system we already paid
Well,
for?
why don't we talk about this between now and May 16th? I
Sounds
would
good.
recommend sooner rather than later because things will get more tight as we get later, but I'm happy to talk to you about it further.
Okay, final question.
Yeah.
So regarding the schools first proposal or schools first, yes, funding proposal. You and I discussed this, and I think I said this on the record too. So while I'm glad to see that we are not cutting or proposing to eliminate positions that are currently filled, I am curious to know how you all picked the 41 FTE vacancies that are being swept. And if we could get a breakdown of what those jobs and functions would have been, because the chart document, while it will tell me what division, it doesn't tell me what the role is. And I just want to make sure we're not cutting something that we're going to regret.
Well, I will say this. You said something that we are going to regret. I do expect whenever a committee makes a change to an executive agency's proposed budget, it's dire consequences. That's what we hear. And of course, we know from experience that it's not dire consequences. I'm reasonably confident that all of the positions are vacant. And it's also a truth with regard to DCPS and not other agencies that most of their budget is really what we appropriate is the rolled up line and not the specifically what's underneath it. So we identify positions, but DCPS has enormous flexibility to then move dollars around as they need.
Okay, but do you have a list of what you think?
We can get you a list.
Okay, great.
We will get you a list.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. I had a lineup. Councilmember Lewis George.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to your staff for their hard work putting together this budget and report that's before us today. With more education public witnesses this year than ever before, it is clear that the dollars we invest in our schools and our kids are the heart of our annual budget. I'm glad to see your team, Chairman, was able to reverse 23 million in school cuts to push forward the schools first in budgeting priorities. I'm still digging into some understanding of the source of those funds. But I may have further questions about this Wednesday, but what I see right now is a huge step forward. I'm also excited to see your budget preserves eligibility expansion of childcare subsidies. Early childhood education can run families as much as $25,000 to $30,000 a year. I know many Ward 4 families whom this is an expense that is too great and that pushes them out of the city. By increasing subsidy eligibility to 300% of federal poverty, we are keeping our promise to another 2,000 families to create the nation's most affordable, most high-quality early learning system. Our high-quality early learning system is, of course, built upon the hardworking educators who care for our city's children in their earliest, most developmentally critical years. I'm grateful for OSSI's continued partnership in implementing the early educator pay equity funds, but remain concerned by the inappropriate cuts the executive made to the fund. While the fund may be okay sharing resources in this tough budget year, I worry that we have set a precedent of shortchanging these essential educators in out years. We cannot simultaneously demand higher credentials without fair compensation. So we will continue monitoring the pay equity fund solvency against positive factors like sector growth and educational achievements. Lastly, I'm grateful that your budget restores 6 the Department of Building housing inspectors that the executive cut as we share oversight over department buildings. Every day we hear from constituents about shoddy, dangerous construction work on new condos, slumlord conditions in aging apartment buildings, and lackadaisical landlord responses to an array of housing code violations. And so it is important for us to ensure that we have the housing inspectors necessary to do this critical work. The purpose of splitting this agency was to improve outcomes for our residents, not replicate longstanding challenges. I believe more work will need to be needed here to restore staffing capacity for housing code inspectors. So I look forward to working with you, Chairman, to realize that goal before first reading. As we move into the next phase of budget work, I look forward to working with my colleagues to make the difficult but necessary choices to invest in these programs and services that lift up working families in the district. And support our community the way Councilmember Trayon White talked about it. We got to be honest, when our residents do not have stable housing or certainty about their next meal or face violence in their homes, not much else matters to them. These are urgent. Can I have one more minute, Chairman?
Without objection.
These are urgent, truly immediate needs for our city. And I'm afraid that we will need to do more to prioritize the most pressing needs of our residents. When I see hundreds of millions set aside for federal lands and other initiatives that may not make the immediate difference in someone's daily struggles. A vibrant and equitable city will only be achieved when we pass people first budgets. And that is what I remain committed to and look forward to working with you and my colleagues to make that happen. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember Foon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee and staff who I know have worked so hard on putting this all together. This has been an interesting process for me to go through the first time, and this first round has been something fascinating. I note that implicitly or explicitly in each of the reports, there's an acknowledgement that this next round that's coming is equally, if not perhaps more important. Through this process so far, many of the specific things that I've advocated for and many of us have advocated for have been addressed in positive ways, and I find that very encouraging. Of course, for all of us, there are things that have not yet been picked up, and I'm looking forward to working with you and working with my colleagues in the weeks to come to see that those things can be addressed, and that we can land with a budget that reflects all of our values as fully as possible. Within the 4 corners of this report, the first thing that I think I want to raise up is your inclusion of a mid-year mobility fund. That's a thing that I've advocated for a number of years, I didn't know it would be characterized as harassment, but by my colleague, but I think this is a very important thing in
I
my.
think he meant it in a nice way.
And I of course think it should be larger, but the fact that it is there is very, very important. And I thank you for that. And at the same time, the addition of a lot of new resources for schools is something that is very important as you've tried to implement the Schools First in Budgeting Act. One thing that concerns me is the school in Ward 3 that has been the loudest in calling for additional resources under this formula doesn't get resources. That's Murch Elementary, where they have real issues with class size. I know you sent a letter to the chancellor about this. I know you understand the concerns I have about this and the concerns the community has. I do hope that that can be solved either through one of these additional funds or by DCPS, because it's an important need. In the meantime, I'm gonna, and as others have said, I'm gonna want to dig in to fully understand how the new dollars address needs and what are the implications of the corresponding cuts. It's a lot that's happening in here and a lot for all of us to digest. I'll add my voice to thanking you for what you've done for St. Coletta, for thanking you for what you've done for Hardy Middle School. I do think it's important. I toured all of the schools in the Jackson Reed feeder last year, and Hardy is the most beat up. After Jackson Reed is the most beat up. I also one more minute, if I could.
If there's no objection.
Also want to thank you for the additional FTEs for the state board. That's something quite important as well. And also for hearing the request of the DC SAA and adding dollars there. Again, an important thing. I want to lift up Councilmember Nadeau raised UDC. I think it's really important. And I think you share this goal that we fully fund the capital requests for UDC, both for 4250 and for the CRM system. And I also want to lift up what Councilmember Henderson said about the OSSI transportation issue. There's a lot of urgency in the language of the report, but I think we need to look at, is there more we need to do in that space? And then the last thing, one important project in Ward 3 is the Stoddard Elementary addition. And I hope that we can add funds for the Stoddard Elementary addition so it can fully serve its community. Those are things that I'll be talking with you about in the next couple of weeks. And I look forward to working with you. But in the interim, thank you very much for this report and all the work that you and your staff have done on it.
Thank you, Councilmember. I don't have anybody else in the lineup.
Chairman,
If you would, just a moment, Councilmember Pinto, and then I'll call on you. With Stoddard, I thought some money was being transferred in. I'm mistaken. I think you and I should talk. I think I need something more specific in terms of dollars and project description. I don't mean a criticism in that, but if you can give me that, then I can try to work between now and May 16th and see if we can add some money. My impression is we're not talking about a lot of money.
Well, we may be talking about a little bit more than we had talked about before. Just yesterday, DCPS sent to the Stoddard community 4 options that could be pursued. So there is something quite specific that we can talk about, and let's talk about it in the next weeks.
Okay, happy to do that. Councilmember Pinto?
thank you, Chairman. And thank you and congratulations on this budget and to your whole team. I wanted to thank you for a couple of particular investments in terms of accepting dollars from the Judiciary Committee for the Presumptive Disability Fund. I appreciate your work on that, as well as the Hardy renovations, as well as Garrison Elementary School to improve safety and allow for extended community use during evening hours. There are a lot of other investments that I think are great in here, from the housing code inspectors at DOB and support for St. Coletta Special Education Public Charter School, more at-risk funding support, as well as the grants for the Commission on Arts and Humanities, which I think is a continuing need that we hear from many of our institutions across the city for additional funding that is also vitally important to our goals around arts, around employment, around tourism, and is very important. I appreciate the recognition of the importance of Ford's Theater, Warner Theater, and National Theater as anchor institutions that continue to be a really vital part of our recovery. There are some items that I hope that we can continue working together to identify additional funding for with the committee of the whole as we all come together after these markups, especially with the much needed funding for access to justice and victim services. These were areas that the Judiciary Committee prioritized in trying to find funding for, but the gaps are still great and we need additional dollars for those fundamentally critical supports for our residents. I hope that we will still be able to find funding for the BEST Act to ensure that our small businesses and entrepreneurs can have an easier path towards participating and setting up their business, as well as retail, the retail grants as part of the Recovery Act to make sure that we can address some of the vacancies that we continue to see throughout the city. I hope that we can also have a continued conversation around flexible scheduling, especially as some of my colleagues have mentioned these unspent ESSER dollars and considering using some of those to pursue flexible scheduling, which I think is a great path forward to address, to start to address some of our major teacher retention challenges that we have continued to see. I do want to talk about downtown and the very serious concerns I have with this budget and with the budgets of many of our committees that I believe are going to harm downtown and our goal for recovery. I am very concerned what impact it will have on the long-term recovery efforts for our city, whether that's attempts to defund the K Street Transitway, charging more for our employers, offering parking, to proposals for congestion parking, which targets downtown. I am very worried that instead of what I believe we need to be doing of making investments to ensure that our downtown will recover, that these pieces together will harm downtown even further, causing further long-term damage to the economic engine of our city. Downtown is also not just downtown for Ward 2. This is the downtown for all of DC, and we all need it to thrive and be successful. It cannot be a punching bag penalizing our efforts to get people back to work and to live there. Downtown will not recover without targeted intervention and investment. And certainly we shouldn't be making it even less attractive or desirable for people to come back during this time. I'm reminded of the story of the giving tree, where the boy keeps going to the tree, asking him to give, and the tree gives and gives until it has no more to give. We are similarly asking downtown to give, and we keep going back and asking it for more and more, and downtown keeps giving. But if we keep taking from downtown and not investing back in it, then soon, like the boy in the giving tree, we will be left with a stump. And our downtown won't have anything more to give to the rest of the city and all of our shared priorities. Just looking at my time here. I mean, K Street in particular, I am really stunned by the committee's decision to kill the K Street Transitway project and take $115 million of operating dollars, trade it with you, Chairman, for capital dollars, and then use it to fund another one of its priorities for free buses. And while that goal is laudable, we must have reliable and time efficient transit. K Street is an opportunity to transform a thorough way and to make it easier and smoother for pedestrians, transit riders, and drivers. And while some parts of the plan do need continued work, I admit this. I think that we should be focused on securing additional funding from the federal government and working to resolve the bike lane challenges. But this project is an opportunity to improve K Street that will benefit downtown for decades to come. The bus priority lanes in particular will improve speed and reliability of bus service and increase ridership by making public transit a more attractive option for moving through our city. If we remove funding for this project, I don't think it will ever move forward. And it's frustrating to hear colleagues argue that it's justifiable to completely defund this project if simply some of our stakeholders had some disagreements. If we canceled a project every time stakeholders express their concerns, we would never get any project done. And we would discourage people from expressing their concerns. The status quo of the corridor is not acceptable. And I think it's on us to keep pushing this vital project forward. With congestion pricing, we need a thorough and comprehensive review of this issue with public input, not pushing this forward through the budget. I've already heard from a number of Ward 2 residents who live downtown saying that this feels unnecessarily punitive and that they deserve a chance to be heard. I will note we have established a tax revision commission to consider the larger panoply of issues here and a comprehensive reform of our tax code.
You're about 3 minutes over your time.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'll just have 30 more seconds. I think ultimately these are penalties for downtown and will harm our efforts to get more people to live and work downtown. So I ask our colleagues all here today that we hit pause and reflect on the real impacts of these decisions. It's laudable to want to make the investments and to pursue these policy goals, but we cannot be short-sighted about what these impacts will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. The congestion pricing is not something that's before us today, and we will have a work session next week where this can be discussed. K Street is sort of before us today, so I do want to respond to that. What I have heard from the business and development community is considerable, I want to emphasize considerable apprehension of moving forward with that project at this time, which would be extremely disruptive to K Street. And while it's arguable that it would bring benefits in the future, and I have had several discussions today about the value of investments, even when we have an austere budget. The reality is that if we want downtown to recover, we can't be disrupting its streets in the short term, which is exactly when we need it to recover. So if it's a good idea, and I frankly think it needs a little refinement, because that's what I've been hearing from the business community, we can pause on that project and refine it. But to move forward with it at this point would simply, I mean, think about this. Some members have been around long enough to remember how we've had to provide relief to businesses along Florida Avenue when it was torn up for reasons I can't remember now. It might have been DC Water. And we've had to provide relief to other business districts when there's been a substantial amount of construction. Here, we would be providing relief to, I guess, vacant storefronts because they're desperately trying to attract retailers and tenants. And so this is not the right time to be moving forward. That's why it's in my recommendation. I don't think anybody else is in the lineup.
Mr. Chairman.
I guess somebody else is in the lineup, Mr. McDuffie.
Yeah, I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. I'm in transit in Port Over. Just to say a couple things. Let me start with thanking you and your team for putting together a lot of work, and I think a budget that I will be supporting today in the committee of the whole. I want to thank you for the things you've done around education, the funds you restored for our schools, the funds you restored for the Department of Buildings, and frankly, I think working with a number of us and committee chairs across the different committees to both support initiatives that are in those committees, but also to be on the receiving end of funds transferred into your committee to support council priorities. And so I wanted to really highlight and lift that up because I think there's a lot of work that has gone into this. And as everybody else has said, we do so in the context of some really tough financial times. I know we have a work session coming up, Chairman, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with this, and I'm going to stay within my 3 minutes. But we do absolutely have to talk about downtown specifically, but some of the policies that are resulting in work done by committees that will, I think, undermine the city's ability to attract people back to work. If we say we want folks to come back to work, whether it's the federal government and all the other people who are working remotely today, then we've got to be mindful about policies that we put in place that actually tell a different story and send a different signal. And so I think the work session is the appropriate place for us to really get into this, because a number of those things are not within the little committee of the whole. But I think the work session is going to be an appropriate place to really explore some of these things, because we were raising revenues, Chairman, when I thought there were some commitments just a couple of years ago not to do that so soon. I know times are tough, but you know, we're subsidizing certain programs that are suggesting that you want people to ride buses. You're taxing, I think, some drivers, or adding fees, and then you are, you know, sending signals to folks who, you know, take Lyft or Uber that, you know, it's going to be more expensive for them, and they're not even driving. And then not to mention the gig workers who are actually using those jobs as a way to provide themselves money and to be able to take care of themselves and their families. So I'm going to end right there, Chairman, but I thought it was necessary to say that we absolutely have to have that conversation, because I think some of the policies are run counter to the narrative that we want people back in our city, downtown, elsewhere, to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. Give me just a moment. If there's no further discussion, we have the report on recommendations before us with leave for staff. I think we can do this by a voice vote. Be happy to hear that. So all those in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? I don't see or hear any no votes. The report and recommendations are approved unanimously. That is going to conclude the business for this meeting. I mentioned the work session is on May 3rd. We have a legislative meeting on May 2nd. We have a committee of the whole and a legislative meeting on May 16th. Time is, oh, I need to thank some folks. Yes. Yes. Yeah, breakfast is not served. I believe lunch is served. You can go cook your, you want me to cook eggs for you, Mr. White? Not promising, because then I'll have a lineup, but lunch will be provided. So the budget director is saying 10, and so that's what time we'll start. That's just wrong. Truth in advertising. Oh, don't worry, it won't go that late. Okay, you can tell I've not given any thought to this. Next Wednesday, 9:30 is the work session. Was there another question? Okay, I did neglect to thank staff. I want to thank Evan Cash, who's the Committee and Legislative Director, and Blaine Stum, Senior Policy Advisor, Committee of the Whole. Our education team, Lakeisha Jordan, Raleigh Lancaster, Bijan Verlin, Christian Washington, who's on my personal staff as special counsel. In the budget office, besides Jen Budoff, I want to thank Andy Eisenlohr, Kyra Smith, and Ann Phelps. And I'll be thanking them again on May 16th. And I also want to thank everyone else in the budget office, although they weren't as directly involved with the committee of the whole today. And in the general counsel's office, Dan Golden, Lauren Mendoza. And I'll be thanking more folks in the general counsel's office on May 16th. This is just a reminder to members. I think many of you have heard this, that as we move through this, the process that the committee of the whole follows with amendments is we run them by my staff, run them by the budget office staff, run them by the general counsel, and also run them by the Office of Revenue Analysis. So it's a much more rigorous review than we go through with ordinary legislation that goes through. So with that, again, thank you to everyone. And our work was done for today. And the time is 4:59. If I wait another few seconds, but I won't, this meeting's adjourned.